Welcome to the channel Uniquely Female Troubles. My name is Leslie Wells, and in this video we are going to talk about hymens, normal hymens and abnormal hymens, and the kind of problems that abnormal hymens can cause. I was born with an abnormal hymen, and after we talk about the science of hymens, I'm going to explain to you how that affected my life. And my biggest hope in talking about this is that people will become aware of the fact that you can be born with an abnormal hymen that can have very dire consequences in your life if it is not addressed properly. And I have literally never met a person who is not a medical professional who knows this can happen. And that is one of the actual main reasons that I decided to start this channel, which is going to be about a lot more than hymens, but that's the first thing I want to get out, is about hymens. And it sounds so silly because hymens seem like this little tiny minor thing, and they are when they're normal. But when they're not normal, they're anything but a little tiny minor thing. So what is a hymen? A hymen is just a small piece of tissue that is very close inside to your vaginal opening. It is not a seal. Like people talk about popping a girl's cherry. Well, there's no cherry. And there's no popping. That sounds like there's a balloon stretched over the outside of your vagina. Well, if there was, how would you menstruate? There is no anything like that. It's not a seal. And if it is broken, which it can be broken by many things, the two of the most common things that I've read about that can break the hymen are bike riding and horseback riding. If you have a broken hymen, you're still a virgin. A virgin is someone who has not had intercourse. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with your hymen. But because sometimes when a hymen breaks, a girl will bleed. I'm sorry, I just bumped the tripod, which I seem to have a bad habit of doing. But anyway, just because you have a broken hymen does not mean you are not a virgin. And unfortunately, especially in history, you had to prove you were a virgin. Especially if you were like a princess or somebody. And actually, like queens and princesses, when they got married back, say, in the Middle Ages or even the time of the Tudors, the Renaissance, if you had to have bloody sheets the next morning. And women, queens, and princesses and nobility, they would keep those sheets their entire life. Because anytime in your life, somebody might come back and say, you weren't a virgin when you got married. And another thing that could happen is if you don't bleed that night, they could execute you. Yeah, you could be executed for not being a virgin. And they thought not having bloody sheets meant you were not a virgin. And that is so not true. I mean, that is completely ignorant. And sometimes you might have an intact hymen, but not bleed when it's broken. Or you could not have an intact hymen, but still be a virgin. So this idea of bloody sheets proving the fact that you're a virgin is very ignorant. It's just stupid. And I wondered, after I read all about all that, I thought, I wonder how many women were executed for not being virgins. And that's more in the upper class. I mean, obviously. That I don't think very many peasant women were executed because they weren't virgins. In fact, in some peasant cultures during that time period, the guy and the lady would get together, and until she got pregnant, they wouldn't get married. When she was pregnant by the guy, then they would get married, and that was because a man did not want to marry a woman who was not fertile, not realizing that he could very well be the reason she's not having a baby. It might not even be her, but of course they always blame the woman. So it was very different. But if you were a queen, I mean, it was like so important to these guys to know that they were the biological father of their heir. And so that was the way they thought would prove that, which doesn't prove anything at all. It really doesn't. So a normal hymen does not close up your vagina. If you think about it logically, you could not menstruate if that was the case. So, I mean, it makes sense. Another really interesting thing about hymens is doctors do not know why we have them. They do not know the purpose of a hymen. And my personal opinion is that we don't have any body parts that have no purpose. Now, some body parts are what they call vestigial. A vestigial body part is something that we used to have a use for. They say that our appendix are vestigial. At some point in time, we needed our appendix, but because of evolutionary changes, we don't anymore. Also, wisdom teeth. At some point in time, we needed our wisdom teeth, but we don't anymore. Another part of our body that is vestigial is our tailbone. Why do we need a tailbone if we don't have a tail? I like to know the answer to that. We don't, but we used to have tails. So that's why we still have a tailbone. That's called a vestigial body part. Is the hymen a vestigial body part? It might be. Or is it a part that scientists have not been able to determine the purpose of? That's possible too. We don't know. But I think it's very interesting that we have a hymen and they don't even know what it's for. So it is very rare to be born with an abnormal hymen. That is a rare thing that I got the privilege of having. Yeah, lucky me. So, you are born, okay, an abnormal hymen is a congenital birth defect, actually. It's a minor one, but it is congenital. Congenital just means you're born with it. So, your hymen the kind of hymen you have doesn't change. If you're born with one kind of hymen, you're going to have that kind of hymen until either you don't have a hymen anymore, either through hymenectomy or through normal intercourse or whatever. So it's very rare. And the low number, it's between these two numbers. The low number is 0.05%, which means out of 4 billion women who are alive right now, which is, I know it's a very round number and it's probably an outdated number, but I'm going to say there are 4 billion women, half of 8 billion. If it is 0.05%, that means that 2 million women that are alive right now were born with an abnormal hymen. The high number is 0.1%, which means that 40 million women were born with an abnormal hymen. But those are very small numbers considering 4 billion. And there are 4 types of abnormal hymens. Now, the first type is called an imperforate hymen, which you know what the word perforate means. It means make a hole in something. An imperforate hymen does not have a hole at all. Now, that is like a seal. It's like a plug. But the thing of it is, it can't be popped because it's way too thick for that. So if you have an imperforate hymen, when you're born with it, and then when it's time for you to go through adolescence and start menstruating, your body will go through that process, but nothing will come out. It's impossible for anything to come out when you have that thing there. It's a solid barrier. Nothing can go in, nothing can come out. So the good thing about having an imperforate hymen is if you're getting proper medical care, which I hope all, children are, then your doctor and your parents will notice, like, your body's going through all the changes that you go through during that age, yet you're not menstruating. How come? And then the doctor will examine you, and he knows right away. The doctor knows right away if you have a kind of abnormal hymen, because he will try to put the speculum inside of you, and it'll just hit a barrier. It's might be the easiest thing he or she has to diagnose. So then once they find out you do have this, then they can give you a hymenectomy, and you won't go into your first sexual encounter or like on your wedding night or whenever, like I did, not knowing that you have an abnormal hymen and go through a very traumatic experience. So that is one advantage of an imperforate hymen. The second kind of abnormal hymen is called a microperforate hymen, which perforate again means a hole, micro just means small. So in a microperforate hymen, you will have one tiny hole, usually in the center of the hymen. Again, that does not allow normal menstruation. You can usually have spotting if you have a microperforate hymen, but you cannot have intercourse. And again, hopefully it will be discovered by a doctor, because like, why are you only spotting? Why aren't you having a full period? And you go through that thing. The third kind of hymen that I'm going to talk about is called a septate hymen. a septate hymen is different because it's not a solid barrier. It's kind of like a cord. And it can go from top to bottom or side to side. The thing that's really interesting about a septate hymen is, like, if it's right down the center, then you do have to have it removed to have intercourse. But sometimes it's there, but it's all the way up at the top or all the way at the bottom or one side or the other, and it might not interfere with intercourse at all. You might not ever know you have one. And I guess that would be the best kind of abnormal hymen to have. But if it isn't really all the way over on one side or top or bottom, it does need to be removed, just like every other kind of abnormal hymen. The kind of hymen I was born with, it has two names. The first word is cribriform, and the second name for it is cruciform. And that type of hymen is just as thick as the others, but it has a lot of holes in it. So it does not interfere with menstruation. So there is really no way of knowing that you have it. You have a normal period, just like I did, but yet you have this barrier there. And so that is a problem. And the only way to get rid of an abnormal hymen, it cannot be you could have sex 1 billion times and it would not remove it. You cannot get rid of it that way. No matter how many times a guy wants to try to get rid of it that way, it doesn't work. The only way you can get rid of it is to have an outpatient procedure known as a hymenectomy, which means just removing the hymen. And it's a very minor procedure. I had it in 1981. And what they do is they go in through your vagina. They don't even have to do an incision. They remove the hymen with a scalpel, which I'm sure they have to sew that part back up. I'm assuming. I don't really even know. And then you have that, and hopefully that takes care of the problem. It does take care of the abnormal hymen problem. So now I want to tell you about my personal experience. Again, I did not know I was born with an abnormal hymen. I went through life, I started my menstrual cycle, all that stuff. So I was 15 years old. I had a boyfriend who was 18 years old. He wanted to have sex, of course. And I did not want to have sex, but I agreed to have sex. And the reason I agreed with it is because my self-esteem was so crappy, so bad, that I was willing to do anything to keep him as my boyfriend. I was in love with him, I do believe that, and I think he was in love with me too. But the fact remains is that I was willing to betray myself and have sex with him to keep him. I did not want him to break up with me. And even when I was 15, I knew that boys want sex, and if you don't give them sex, they might go away and find somebody who does give them sex. And I didn't want that to happen. So I betrayed myself. I gave myself away when I was 15 years old, and I agreed to have sex. So we decided to meet early one morning before school. And I told my mom and dad that I had to be at school early for a project I was working on. And, that was fine. And he showed up early, and we met in the woods. There was a place we used to meet sometimes and make out, but we never went all the way. And so he showed up at the right time, and he had a condom with him. And I was scared. I was very scared. And it wasn't something I wanted to do. But again, it was kind of like, okay, I have to do this if I want to keep my boyfriend. And I wanted to keep him very bad. And I was willing. Keeping my boyfriend was more important to me than I was important to me, which I think is really sad. And unfortunately, there's a lot of girls that are doing a lot of sexual stuff that they do not want to do because of the same reason. They care more about keeping their boyfriend than they care about themselves. And I think that's so, so sad. And I know what it feels like because that's how I felt. And it took a long, long time for me to not be that way anymore. So anyway, we met. And so I was really scared. I was so nervous. And he put the condom on, and then we started. And I felt the worst pain I had ever felt in my entire life. I felt like he had a sword and he put it all the way up inside of me. And that's the last thing. So I didn't really, I don't know how to put this. The next thing I remember, so I felt that horrible pain. The next thing I remember is hearing a bunch of screaming. All of a sudden I was aware of this horrible screaming like somebody was killing somebody. I didn't know what it was. And I was just laying there with my eyes closed and I thought, what is all that horrible screaming? And it was me. I realized, it took a couple seconds, but I realized it was me and I stopped. So I sat up and I was alone. He was gone. And it hurt so bad to sit up. It between my legs hurt so bad. And he was gone. So I was calling his name. He wasn't there. And so I had felt this unbelievably horrible pain out of the clear blue sky. That was not what I was expecting to have happen. I didn't know if I was going to like it or not, but I certainly didn't think I was going to feel the worst pain I'd ever felt in my entire life. And then he abandoned me. I was alone in the woods. So I stood up and I was calling his name and I had to accept the fact he's gone. I'm here by myself. And then goody two shoes me. I worried more about being late for school than I worried about what had just happened. I think I was already in the point of kind of like locking that up in a box and putting it in the back of my mind and not ever wanting to open that box again because I got really worried about being to school on time. And I've done that since then too. I'll distract myself with some minor little thing to keep from thinking about the real important thing. I've done that many times in my life since then. That probably wasn't even the first time I did that. So I got all the leaves and sticks or whatever out of my hair, off the back of my shirt, my pants, and I started walking to school. And I was hobbling. It hurt really bad to stand up, to walk, to do anything. And but I walked to school. I got there on time. I wasn't late. And one thing I didn't tell you yet is this guy was Hispanic. And he was very conscious of that. He'd been called a spick before. And so he was sitting at his desk. So I sat down at my desk right beside him and I was like, why did you leave me there? Where were you? Where did you go? Why did you leave me? And he looked at me and he looked really sad. And he said that I was screaming really loud, talking about me, that I was screaming really loud. He couldn't get me to stop. And he finally left because he was so sure that somebody was going to hear me screaming and come and say that the spick raped the white girl. So he left. He panicked. And I forgave him for that. And I feel like I forgave him too easily because I just, oh, that's okay. No problem. And he was saying, I'm sorry. So I forgave him. But, looking back, I couldn't really understand how he felt. It was very prejudiced there against anybody who wasn't white. And it was, and he was only 18 when I was 15, I didn't think 18 was young. But of course now, I think 18 is really young. And he panicked and he ran away. That's just what happens. So we broke up eventually, and I joined a very patriarchal Christian cult. And in this cult, it gives the husbands all the power over the wives. The wives have no power. The husbands have all the power. And I joined this cult voluntarily. I was not raised in it. And then I married this guy. He joined it too. He joined it through me. We started dating and I invited him to go to church with me. And he joined it too. And we got married. We got married when I was 19. And believe it or not, I went to my wedding night and on my honeymoon without once, not even once, thinking about what had happened when I was 15. That's how much I had that stuck in a box in the back of my mind. I hadn't repressed it. I think I suppressed it, which is different, I think I consciously just suppressed it. So I didn't think about it. I never thought that what happened when I was 15 had any relevance to what I was about to try to do. So we went on our honeymoon, we went on our wedding night, and when we tried to do that for the first time, which we never tried to do that before, I was still a virgin, which I was going to be a virgin until I had a hymenectomy. But I was still a virgin, and so we tried to have sex, and again, worst pain I'd ever felt. I was screaming, I was crying, I was trying to get away from him. I did not go into an altered state of consciousness. That didn't happen that time. But I could not make him stop, and he didn't stop. He did not stop until he reached his own satisfaction. And then he let go of me. I ran in the bathroom. I was crying. I thought I would have blood all over me, but I had no blood, and I know now why. But when I came back out of the bathroom, he was asleep. Yep, he was asleep. And, I'm 63 years old. And it wasn't until I was 62 that I realized the correct word for what happened to me on my wedding night. And I don't need to tell you guys what this word is. It is, what happened to me on that night. But I was in just so much denial that it took me all the way till I was from the time I was 19 to the time I was 62 to realize what the correct word for that night was. So anyway, for the rest of the honeymoon, he insisted that we do that every night. And every time we did it, I told him, I need to go to the doctor. Something's really wrong with me. I need to go to the doctor. We need to not do this anymore until I go see the doctor. This isn't normal. And he kept saying, like, oh, yeah, it always hurts girls the first few times. And it always, you have a low pain tolerance and blah, 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 blah. So we kept doing it. And then we got home from our honeymoon and we continued to do it. Try to do it. 2 or 3 times a week we would try. He always said, come on, we got to go try. And I was dreading it so much. But, I didn't say no because I felt like he was the boss. And every time I kept telling him just for 6 months that I needed to go to the doctor. And he kept telling me no. And 6 months later, he was still saying it always hurts girls the first few times. Well, how many is few? I think it's a lot less than how many times we tried. And then he was saying, you have very low pain tolerance. And then he added, this is just all in your head. There's nothing really wrong with you. And I knew there was something wrong with me. I absolutely knew there was something wrong with me. So after 6 months, I couldn't take it anymore. I just could not take it anymore because every single time we did it, from the last time we did it before I had surgery, the first time I ever tried it when I was 15, it never hurt any less. The pain did not lessen one bit. It's not something you can just get used to. It's just, it's not. I don't know how to describe it other than just saying it hurts just as bad the last time you do it as it does the first time. It's not something that gets any better until it's fixed. So after 6 months, I lied to him and I told him I had a rash and that I needed to see a gynecologist, and he was totally okay with it. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why it wasn't okay for 6 months with being in excruciating pain and then having some little minor rash, which I didn't even really have. It was okay to go to the doctor. I was just really happy. So I went to a gynecologist and he examined me and he knew right away what was wrong with me. He told me I was going to have a hymenectomy, which just means removing the hymen. It's a very minor procedure. And I had it. And I was in the recovery room, so I wasn't there for this conversation, but my ex and our sister-in-law told me that the doctor came out and said my hymen was about 1.5 inches thick. So, those two people aren't exactly in my top 10 people of always saying things that are accurate, but that's what I was told. That's all I can say about that. But, so then you have a 6-week, recovery period, and then you get checked up, and then you're released to go ahead and have sex again because you're not supposed to have sex right after you have a gynecological operation. So I went to the doctor and he started to examine me, and it was very painful. It hurt really bad. And I was like, ow, 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 you're hurting me. And I was trying to get away from him, and he yelled at me. He said, stop that. I fixed you. And I was kind of in shock. Like, oh my gosh. So, he okayed me for sex, and I left. So we were happy. We were excited. Like, wait, yay, things are going to finally be the way they're supposed to be. Well, they weren't. It still hurt. It still hurt a lot. But it didn't hurt as bad as it had hurt before the surgery. If you could say between a scale of 1 to 10, if it hurt 100 before the surgery, maybe it hurt 40 after the surgery. It still hurt really bad. I wasn't crying anymore, but I was in so much pain that I hated it. And for a long time, I really felt like there was something wrong with me because I hated intercourse. And then one day I realized, like, duh, does anybody like pain? Most people don't like pain. And if something hurts really bad, they try to avoid it. Like, that's why we have a pain system to begin with, to help us know what to stay away from. So it took me a long time to, like, it really messes with your, like, self-image if you hate sex. Because this is such a sex-saturated society that, and sex is supposed to be like the greatest thing on earth. So if you don't like sex, you feel like it's hard not to feel like there's something wrong with you. And I felt that way for a really long time. So the mistake I made, like, I was never going to go back to that gynecologist that yelled at me, and I never did. But this mistake I made was I should have gone to a different gynecologist and told that person everything that had happened and say, like, help me, please, what is going on here? But I didn't do that. We just accepted that this is the way it was. And we had a crappy sex life, of course. And, there's more than one way to have sex also. So the years went by, at least 10 years. And I wanted to have a baby really bad. Well, that wasn't happening because we were almost never having sex. Another reason we weren't having a baby is because before I got married, my menstrual cycle was really regular. It was every 35 days. I mean, you could just take a calendar and put an X every 35 days, and that is when my period would start. But as soon as I got married, my periods just went crazy. I mean, I was having them too often. I was having long gaps in between them. I mean, and stress does that to people. It can totally mess up your menstrual cycle, and it was messing mine up. I was so stressed out. The first 2 years I were married were the very worst years of my life. So anyway, just the years went on, and we just kind of went into a new normal that was like a really rotten normal, but it was our normal. And one day I was in a bookstore, and I saw a book. This is the book. I still have it. And I don't know if you can read the subtitle very well, but it says, When a Woman's Body Says No to Sex, Understanding and Overcoming Vaginismus. And when I saw the front, the spine of it just says, When a Woman's Body Says No to Sex, I thought, what is that? And then I picked it up and I read the subtitle, and that was the very first time in my life I'd ever heard the word vaginismus. And vaginismus this is how you spell it. I know you can't read it very well in the on the book cover, but that's vaginismus. About 1% of women have vaginismus, and that's about 40 million women, if there are 4 billion women right now. So the author of this book is named Linda Valens, and this is a pretty old book, but I finally found out what was wrong with me. I had vaginismus. And what vaginismus is it's a psychological condition, but it manifests itself in a physical way. And if you get it real deeply ingrained in your head that sex is bad, whether it's painful, whether it's dirty, disgusting, anything, like sinful, then your unconscious mind can make a connection, and then that will cause your muscles in your vaginal canal to contract. And it's involuntary. You don't control it one way or the other. You have no control over it. You can't just make up your mind and say, well, I'm not going to let those muscles contract. No, the muscles do what they do, and you have no control over it. That's why it's a disorder. It's completely involuntary. In my case, 6 months of 2 or 3 times a week of attempted penetration, causing the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life, was what gave me vaginismus. Another thing, if you're raised and you're taught that sex is disgusting, sex is dirty, sex is sinful. I mean, and I don't mean just like, oh yeah, you shouldn't have sex before you get married. God doesn't want us to do that. I'm not talking about that. Sorry, I bumped it again. But I'm talking about if it's pounded into your head and it goes so deep down inside of you that you can't get rid of that association, like you can't let anything penetrate you, then your body, those muscles will kind of enact what's in your mind that you don't even want to have in your mind. So that happened to me because of pain. I was not raised that way. I mean, I knew my parents didn't want me to have sex before I got married, but it wasn't something they harped on all the time. But some people are raised that way, and that can cause that too. So vaginismus is very hard to get rid of. And for a long time, the only treatment they had for it was you had a set of dilators. And the dilators come in different sizes, and so you take the tiniest one and you put it inside your vagina. And you just practice that every day, however many times a day, until that doesn't hurt anymore and your muscles are okay with that. Then you go up to the next size, and it's a very long, difficult process. And I never did it. And I don't even know how long it takes or how effective it is. I don't know what percentage of women start out with this process that finish it and that don't have vaginismus anymore. There's a much newer treatment, and they are actually injecting women's vaginal muscles with Botox. Now that sounds really weird, doesn't it? But the reason Botox helps with wrinkles is it paralyzes the muscles. Like if I go like this, the reason these two lines suddenly appeared between my eyes is because I use these muscles right here to make that happen. So if I had Botox shot into my forehead, I would not be able to do that. I could try to do it, but the muscles would just sit there because they're paralyzed by the Botox. So if they put Botox in your vaginal muscles, then they cannot contract. And I think that's been pretty successful. And I'm really excited about that. I hope that more people will go to the doctor, tell them about all the problems. I mean, sometimes people, it's really hard to admit that sex hurts and that you don't like sex. I mean, are you frigid? What's wrong with you? I mean, I was told I was frigid. I was told there was something really wrong with me, and I kind of believed it. It's this society, the way it is, it's really hard to feel good about yourself when you hate sex. That's not something people are supposed to hate. But if it hurts that bad, there's absolutely, I mean, if you hate sex for any reason, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means you have a problem, and it's something to hopefully get help with. But it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. There's not something intrinsically wrong with you if you don't like sex. If you don't like sex, there's a reason. Whether the person you're with is inept, doesn't know how to please a woman, whether you have vaginismus, whether you have an abnormal hymen, whether you have there's a lot of things that can cause painful sex. Maybe it's just a matter of lack of lubrication. There's tons of things that can make sex hurt for a woman. And rather than not wanting to admit it to anybody and not wanting to go to the doctor and try to get it fixed, go to the doctor. They probably every other patient they have needs help with painful sex. I don't know the percentages, but you're not going to surprise the doctor by telling him or her that you don't like the pain that you experience from sex. They're not going to be shocked. They're not going to be surprised. They're just going to start thinking of ways to help you and try to figure out what the problem is and all that stuff. You have a problem, but you are not the problem. You are not broken, and you are not defective because sex hurts. You didn't choose for sex to hurt. And if it's hurting, there are people that can help you with that. Please get help. And the thing I want to talk about especially is so many women force themselves to have sex when it hurts because they have a husband, they have a boyfriend that they don't want to lose, and they're afraid, and they don't want to displease that person, either because they love them and they want to make them happy, or because they're afraid of them. What is your husband going to do or your boyfriend going to do to you if you keep saying no to sex because it hurts? He might get really mad at you. He might leave. He might beat you up. I mean, it's horrible to think about what can happen to women if they just don't want to have sex. And they have a man in their life that expects sex from them. And that is a really terrible situation. It's something I want to talk a lot about on this channel because I know what it feels like. And don't force yourself to have sex if it hurts. Just don't. It's a medical condition. That would be like walking around on a broken leg. If you have a broken leg, you're going to go get a cast put on it. It's going to be set, and you're going to be seeing an orthopedic doctor. You're not going to just say, well, my leg's broken, but, my husband's be home from work soon, and he really needs his dinner, so I'm going to go in there and cook dinner anyway. No. Who would do that? Well, how is this any different? It's not. Please, don't do this to yourself, because if you end up with vaginismus, you can't, how can I put it? You don't know. You're giving I don't want to say giving yourself. You don't know that you're doing something that could cause you to get vaginismus. And once you have vaginismus, it is very, very hard to get rid of. And that is just the way it is. So please don't force yourself to do this, even though it hurts. And if you have a partner who's going to take it out on you, whether it's verbally, like emotionally, or even physically, because you can't have sex because it hurts too much, it's really time to question that relationship. Is he the right person for you? I'm not telling you to break up with anybody. I would never do that. But I am saying it's something to think about and evaluate. So I really appreciate you guys listening to this video and watching it. And please, please get this information out to anybody you know who might need it. If you know a girl who has not lost her virginity yet, could be a daughter, could be a niece, could be a granddaughter, could be anybody, a friend, just let her know that this is something that can happen. It's very rare, and it's most likely not going to happen. But she needs to know that if she is in the worst pain, if she's in horrible pain, not just mild pain, and it's a little bit of pain, that to stop. Don't force yourself to continue and go to a doctor. Because if you do what I did, you're setting yourself up for a whole lifetime of pain. And I don't want that to happen to anybody. It is so important for me that this does not keep happening to women. That's why I have this channel. So please like it. Please subscribe and set the notifications so you can get so you can be notified every time I release a video. And thank you. Thank you so very much. Have a great day. Bye.